All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating. We're going to piece together the earliest memories of a childhood spent in a remote Indian village called Pawakali. We'll explore how a whole world gets built in a young mind, from stories passed down by family, all the way to those first vivid flashes of memory, all taking place between 1966 and 1970.
Okay, this one sentence, it's our starting point for everything. It immediately paints this incredible picture of a place that's just constantly alive, always green, thanks to the Mahundan River. This beautiful, natural world is the backdrop for every single memory we're about to explore.
So where are we, exactly? We're in Pawakali, a small government settlement in Bihar. Just try to imagine it, a time way before the internet, where life really moved at its own pace, and your memories were literally rooted in the ground beneath your feet.
This timeline is so interesting because it shows two totally different phases of memory. First, you've got what you could call the hearsay years, all the things he was told about himself. But then, right around age 4, something just clicks. That's when his own personal, first-hand memories start to kick in.
Now that we've got the timeline down, let's zoom right into the center of this small universe, the government colony, the family home, and the stories that kind of filled the air before his own memories could take over.
You know, it's funny when you think about it. Our earliest idea of who we are is built from stories other people tell us. We're basically characters in our own life story before we ever get to be the narrator. And that's exactly where this story begins.
Look at how these details work. It's not just he was born. No, he was born in a special house, it was an auspicious event, there was a huge celebration for the whole community. These aren't just facts, they're like the founding myths of his childhood.
And boom, this is the turning point. This is where the narrator takes the microphone. The world suddenly snaps into focus. It's not about what he was told anymore. It's about what he actually saw and felt for himself.
So this is basically the mental map of a 4-year-old. It's not about street names or addresses, right? It's all about landmarks that matter to you, your home, the big office building, the doctor's house, and of course, the pond with the ducks. Each one is a point on your personal compass.
Okay, so we have the basic layout, but now let's zoom in on the really good stuff. For a kid, the world isn't just a bunch of buildings. It's all about the tiny, magical things you find in between. And this is where that incredible, lush, natural world of Pawakali really comes alive.
An abandoned well. To us, that might sound like nothing. But for a kid, it was a major landmark. And more importantly, it was home to some amazing natural wonders that totally captured his imagination.
And here is a perfect example of that wonder. The Chuimui plant. You know, the Touch Me Not plant. Can you imagine being a little kid and discovering that you can touch a leaf and it just curls up? It's like a little piece of interactive magic, courtesy of the local flora.
The sensory memories just keep coming with these 4 special mango trees. And these weren't just any mangoes, they were Surjapuri mangoes, which have this really distinct white flesh. I mean, think about that. A specific taste, a specific color from this very specific place, still sharp in his mind more than 50 years later.
All right, let's pull back from the quiet wonders of nature for a second and step into the noisy, vibrant world of the community, especially when everyone came together for big celebrations.
So the annual fair, or Mela, for the Durga Puja festival was the event of the year. And because his dad was one of the organizers, the family got a very cool perk that led to another powerful memory: free passes to the cinema tent.
Trying to remember your first movie experience. You probably don't remember the plot, right? It's more of a sensory explosion, the flickering lights, the booming sound, the dialogue that doesn't quite make sense. For him, that experience was a film called Patthar Ke Sanam.
This is just a perfect example of how memory works. He might not have understood the story at all, but this one line of dialogue just lodged itself in his brain. It's like a tiny audio snapshot from the past that's been echoing in his ear ever since. For our final section, let's pull the camera way, way back. We're going beyond the colony, past the festival, to look at the absolutely breathtaking natural landscape that was the backdrop for this entire childhood.
And here we are, full circle, right back to the water. The Mahandana Delta wasn't just a geographical term, it was a living, breathing reality, with streams flowing right there, feeding that constant, lush greenery he remembers so well.
And get this, on clear nights, from their small, remote colony, they could actually see the distant lights of a town nestled high up in the Himalayas. Just imagine seeing that as a little kid, a glittering spectacle on the horizon, connecting your small world to those massive, mysterious mountains?
And that really leaves us with a great question to think about. We've just walked through the delta of one person's memory, a place filled with lush greenery, magical plants, and distant Himalayan lights. So what about you? What are the sights, the sounds, and the natural wonders that form the landscape of your own earliest memories?
Hey, let's open up a diary from 1971 and step right into the village of Chapai. So this is all about the author's return to his village, Chapai, back in the early 70s. Just imagine, no electricity. Life here was totally powered by the people. So first up, Section 1. Let's talk about school, but not like you probably know it. The school was really basic. Kids literally brought their own jute bags from home to sit on. And get this, while the author was a top student, his real motivation was fear of the teacher's stick. But, when the teachers fell asleep, it was game time. Tic-tac-toe on their slates. All right, Section 2. So what was life like outside the classroom? Let's check out the playground. I mean, think about it. What did kids even do for fun without smartphones or streaming? Well, they played outside. Games like Duck Duck, Kabaddi, and hide and seek were the daily routine. A favorite hangout spot was the mango orchard, or Kalambadi. It was the place to be. The village ponds, the dars, were also super important. For water, for animals, for everything. Okay, on to Section 3. Let's talk about what really held this community together. So the author's family was a bit different. They were government workers in a village of farmers. And of course, festivals were a huge part of life, just filled with music and everyone coming together. Take Holi, for example. It all happened in stages, from songs to colors to a huge bonfire. The Darwaza, or front door, was like the village hub for discussing politics, farming, you name it. So this diary is a window into a totally different, connected past. Makes you think, right?
चलिए, आज जरा समय में पीछे चलते हैं। एक ऐसे दौर में जब ना तो स्मार्टफोन हुआ करते थे और ना ही इंटरनेट। ये कहानी है 1970 के दशक की भारत के एक छोटे से गांव में एक बच्चे के बचपन की। तो सवाल उठता है कि तब जिंदगी आखिर थी कैसी? सोचिए जरा, धूल भरी सड़कें, दोस्तों के साथ की जाने वाली ढेरों शरारतें और हाँ, पूरे गांव के साथ मनाए जाने वाले त्योहार। बस यही सब कुछ था। ये उस दुनिया की एक छोटी सी झलक है जिसे हम एक छोटे लड़के की नज़रों से देखने वाले हैं। तो सबसे पहले बात करते हैं रोज़मर्रा की ज़िंदगी की। और दिन की शुरुआत होती थी स्कूल के सफ़र से, जो अपने आप में किसी एडवेंचर से कम नहीं था। रोज़ 2.5 किलोमीटर। जी हाँ, इतना पैदल चलना पड़ता था, वो भी एक कच्ची सड़क पर। पर मज़े की बात यह है कि बच्चों के लिए तो वो धूल भरा रास्ता भी एक खेल का मैदान ही था, जिसमें खेलना उन्हें बहुत पसंद था। और हाँ, गंगेली स्कूल पहुंचना, वो तो जैसे किसी नई दुनिया में कदम रखने जैसा था। जरा सोचिए, प्राइमरी स्कूल में जमीन पर बैठने के बाद पहली बार बच्चों को बैठने के लिए अपनी खुद की टेबल और बेंच मिली। उनके लिए ये कितनी बड़ी और रोमांचक बात रही होगी, है ना? लेकिन स्कूल का मतलब सिर्फ पढ़ाई लिखाई नहीं था। अरे, वो तो अपने आप में एक छोटा मोटा समाज था। अलग अलग टोलों, मतलब मोहल्लों से आए बच्चों के गुटों में अपनी होड़ लगी रहती थी। और यहां तक कि टीचरों के बीच भी अपनी अपनी राजनीति चलती थी। इसका एक उदाहरण देखिए, मतलब नंबर देने में भी अच्छा खासा पक्षपात होता था। एक तरफ हेडमास्टर थे जो अपने पसंदीदा छात्र का साथ देते थे, तो दूसरी तरफ सीताराम बाबू जैसे टीचर भी थे जो इस पक्षपात के खिलाफ खड़े होते थे और इंसाफ करते थे। अच्छा, स्कूल के बाद का समय वो तो और भी मजेदार होता था। मतलब घर वापसी का जो रास्ता था ना, वो शरारतों की प्लानिंग का एक तरह से हेडक्वार्टर बन जाता था। और सबसे बड़ा निशाना क्या होता था? आम का बाग। और वहां से जो कच्चे आम तोड़े जाते थे, जिन्हें टिकोला कहते हैं, उसे खाने का भी एक पूरा प्रोसेस था। मतलब बिल्कुल एक सीक्रेट मिशन की तरह, जिसे पूरी गैंग मिलकर अंजाम देती थी। और इस मिशन के लिए जुगाड़ भी एकदम कमाल का था। सरसों का तेल छुपाने के लिए स्याही वाले पेन का इस्तेमाल होता था। जरा सोचिए, ताकि कोई टीचर उसे पकड़ ही ना पाए। यही छोटी छोटी तरकीबें तो थीं जो उनके एडवेंचर को और भी मज़ेदार बना देती थीं। पर बात सिर्फ आम तोड़ने तक ही खत्म नहीं होती थी। अरे, शरारतों और नियम तोड़ने की तो एक लंबी लिस्ट थी जो रोज की जिंदगी का हिस्सा थी। क्या क्या नहीं होता था।
कभी मिट्टी की चिलम बनाकर आम के सूखे पत्ते पीना, तो कभी किसी के बाग से मीठा मीठा मिश्रीकंद चुराना, कभी गांव के अंधे घोड़े की सवारी करना, तो कभी बारिश में कीचड़ में लोटपोट हो जाना। ये सब उनके रोज के काम थे।
लेकिन इन सब शरारतों और रोमांच के साथ असली खतरे भी जुड़े हुए थे, और जिंदगी के कुछ सबसे जरूरी सबक वो किताबों से नहीं बल्कि ऐसे ही तजुर्बों से सीखे जाते थे।
जैसे बच्चों को साफ साफ मना किया गया था कि जब नहर में पानी ज्यादा हो तो उसमें नहीं तैरना। पर एक दिन उनकी उत्सुकता डर पर हावी हो ही गई। नहर की तेज धार में डूबने का वो अनुभव यकीनन बेहद खौफनाक रहा होगा। ये कड़वी सच्चाई थी। उनकी आज़ादी के साथ असली खतरे भी जुड़े थे, और एक छोटी सी गलती भी जानलेवा साबित हो सकती थी।
और पता है इस घटना के बाद क्या हुआ? उस लड़के को एक झंतर पहनाया गया। ये एक तरह का तावीज होता है। हुआ ये था कि गांव के एक बुजुर्ग ने पहले ही उसकी मां को कुंडली देखकर पानी से खतरे की चेतावनी दी थी। ये दिखाता है कि उस दौर में विश्वास कैसा था और बच्चों की सुरक्षा की कितनी चिंता की जाती थी।
चलिए अब रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी से हटकर बात करते हैं त्योहारों की, जब पूरा गांव एक हो जाता था। उस जमाने में जब बिजली नहीं थी तो ये त्योहार अपने साथ एक अलग ही तरह का जादू लेकर आते थे।
दिवाली की रात की कल्पना करके देखिए। घर बिजली के बल्बों से नहीं बल्कि सरसों या मिट्टी के तेल से जलते हुए सैकड़ों, जी हां, सैकड़ों मिट्टी के दियों की रोशनी से जगमगा उठते थे।
उस रात होता क्या क्या था। सब में होड़ लगी रहती कि सबसे अच्छी हाथ की बनी मोमबत्ती कौन बनाएगा। घर दियों से सजाए जाते, हुक्का पार्टी जैसा एक मजेदार खेल खेला जाता, और फिर बड़ों का आशीर्वाद लेकर मिठाई बांटी जाती। सही मायनों में एक ऐसा त्योहार था जिसे पूरा समुदाय मिलकर मनाता था। और त्योहारों की एक और बहुत बड़ी खासियत थी गांव का नाटक। गांव के ही नौजवान मिलकर कई कई रातों तक चलने वाले नाटक करते थे, और उसे देखने के लिए पूरा का पूरा गांव इकट्ठा होता था।
और एक्टिंग भी क्या कमाल की होती थी। मतलब इतनी असली कि कभी-कभी तो दर्शक भूल ही जाते थे कि ये सब नाटक है। जैसे एक बार लड़ाई का सीन देखकर कथावाचक की दादी सच में रोने लगी, और उन्हें देखकर वहां मौजूद सभी लोग हंस पड़े। सोचिए क्या माहौल रहा होगा।
तो बचपन की ये कहानी हमें दिखाती है कि उस जिंदगी में शायद किसी चीज की कमी नहीं थी, बल्कि वो रिश्तों और अनुभवों से कहीं ज्यादा अमीर थी। लोग एक दूसरे से, अपने आसपास की दुनिया से, अपने समुदाय से बहुत गहराई से जुड़े हुए थे। और यह हमें सोचने पर मजबूर करता है कि आज के इस दौर में कनेक्शन का असली मतलब आखिर है क्या?
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dig into something I think we can all relate to, the anatomy of a comeback. We've got a story that asks this huge question. Is it possible that your absolute lowest moment, I mean rock bottom, is actually the key to unlocking your greatest potential? Let's find out.
So how does that happen? I mean, really, think about it. How does a complete and utter failure become the bedrock for future success? As we get into this, I want you to think about a moment like that in your own life. You know, a real setback. Because our story today, it starts with a massive culture shock and one seriously steep uphill climb.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1978. We're following a young boy from a quiet little village. Now for him, getting a higher education meant packing up and leaving behind everything he knew. He was moving to a town called Pernya. And trust me, this wasn't just a change of address. It was like stepping onto a different planet.
And you can just feel the culture shock, can't you? I mean, just imagine, one day you're on quiet dirt paths where you know everyone. And the next, you're on roads just jam-packed with buses and cars and surrounded by a sea of unfamiliar faces. The source material actually calls it a totally different scene. And that right there, going from this super tight-knit community to this overwhelming brand new place, that's the first huge hurdle he's got to clear.
So he gets to Bada Bazar High School, and this place has a reputation for being incredibly strict. But his first test, well, it had nothing to do with books or math. It was a showdown over the rules, right there at the school gates. And this one little encounter, it basically set the tone for everything to come.
Now get this, he'd scored a rank of 32 on the entrance exam. For a kid coming from a village school, that's a huge deal. But the principal, a man named Mr. Ramanan Chaudhary, was famously strict. He takes one look at our guy, sees he isn't wearing the proper white shoes, and just like that, rejects his application. On the spot. Over shoes. A tiny, tiny detail that suddenly becomes this massive wall.
Okay, so he finally gets the right shoes, he gets in, but it's not over. He has some kind of argument with the principal, and that lands him not in the top section his score deserved, but all the way down in Section C. This was literally the bottom rung of the school's social ladder. You had Section B, that was for the best students, the sons of officers and important people, and now he was officially on the outside looking in.
And at first, he did pretty well. He actually managed to come in first in his section in 7th grade. But that little bit of success, it turned out to be incredibly fragile. A couple of things happened, one after another, that just sent him into a total downward spiral.
And you can see just how fast everything fell apart here. He's so proud he earned a new bicycle for being #1, but then a relative comes along and kind of bursts his bubble, pointing out, yeah, but you're only top of the bottom section. And his father, hearing this, is so disappointed he takes the bike away. Oof. You can imagine what that did to his confidence. It was just crushed. By the time 8th grade rolled around, he was straight up terrified of math, history, you name it. And then, rock bottom. He buys a kunji, a cheat sheet, out of pure desperation, and it gets stolen right before a huge math exam. Just wow.
And right here, this is the turning point. This is the whole idea of our story today. Sometimes hitting that absolute, undeniable rock bottom is the only thing that can shake you enough to force a real change. This complete crisis, this was the strange, unlikely spark that was about to change everything.
So what happened? Well, his mother saw him struggling, and she put her foot down. She insisted that his father send him to go live with one of his teachers, a man named Shri Muchkund Kunwar. She just flat out refused to let her son fail. And that one decision, that single act of faith from his mom, it changed the entire trajectory of his life.
But, a change of scenery isn't enough. The fire still needed a real spark to get going. He was already seen as a poor student, and one day he's trying to work out a math problem with a classmate, Suman Singh. And this classmate just casually says something like, "Ugh, you're so average." Now, the source material says that comment didn't break him. Oh no, it made him furious. And that rage, that was the final push he needed. It lit a fire under him to prove every single person wrong.
And that newfound fire, it translated into immediate, focused action. We're not just talking about studying a little harder here. No, this was about building a completely new identity for himself, right from the ashes of that disastrous 8th grade year.
And the results were, well, they were instant and they were absolutely jaw-dropping. He just devoured his books, and he even found this new love for subjects like geometry that used to terrify him. And in the very next half-yearly exam, he scores over 650 out of 900. I mean, that's a score so high it was almost enough to top 2 sections combined. What a comeback. Just spectacular.
So his climb back up that school ladder was incredibly fast. His teacher, Mr. Kunwar, saw what was happening and went straight to the principal to plead his case. And it worked. He gets transferred to Section B. Yep, the best section, the one he was shut out of from day one. And he didn't just scrape by in there. He absolutely thrived. In no time, he earned the 4th rank among the school's most elite students.
All right, so where does this incredible journey of highs and lows finally end up? The true test, the big one, was the final board exam. This is where he'd be measured against the very same students he once felt like he was a million miles behind.
And here it is, the final results. He placed 4th, not in his section, but in the entire school. He got 677 marks, just a single point away from 3rd place. Look at that list. He's right there, firmly ranked among the school's absolute brightest kids, who all went on to become doctors, engineers, CAs. He didn't just catch up. He had well and truly earned his place at the very top.
When you look back, this story isn't really just about grades, is it? It's about resilience. It shows us that a setback, a careless comment, or even one person believing in you can be the exact thing that forges your future. So as we wrap this up, it makes you think, right? What was the turning point that forged you?
नमस्कार। कहते हैं ना, हर किसी की जिंदगी में एक ऐसा मोड़ जरूर आता है जो सब कुछ बदल के रख देता है। तो आज मैं अपनी ही कहानी सुनाने जा रही हूँ, एक ऐसे वक्त की जब मैंने अपनी जिंदगी की सबसे बड़ी चुनौती का सामना किया। ये सफर है गिरावट से उठकर वापस सफलता पाने का। मेरी वापसी की कहानी की शुरुआत वो एक बहुत बड़े बदलाव से होती है। मतलब गांव की वो शांत, अपनी सी लगने वाली जिंदगी को छोड़कर एक बिल्कुल नए, हलचल भरे शहर में आ जाना।
तो ये सफर शुरू हुआ पूर्णिया शहर से। यहाँ एक नए स्कूल की चुनौतियां थीं और साथ ही सफलता का पहला स्वाद भी यहीं चखने को मिला।
गांव की शांति से निकलकर शहर का शोर, सच कहूं तो एक झटके जैसा था। सब कुछ कितना अलग था। मैं जगदेव डेरा में रहने लगा था, जहां मेरे जैसे कई छात्र रहते तो थे, लेकिन फिर भी मन में एक अकेलापन सा रहता था। खैर, मैंने वहां के सबसे नामी स्कूल भट्टा बाजार हाई स्कूल की प्रवेश परीक्षा दी और 32वीं रैंक हासिल की। गांव के स्कूल से आए एक लड़के के लिए ये बहुत बहुत बड़ा और गर्व का पल था। लेकिन एडमिशन होते होते रह गया, सिर्फ एक जोड़ी सफेद जूतों की वजह से। प्रिंसिपल साहब श्री रामानंद चौधरी बहुत ही सख्त थे और मेरी इतनी अच्छी रैंक के बावजूद मुझे क्लास के सबसे कमजोर माने जाने वाले सेक्शन यानी सेक्शन सी में डाल दिया गया। वो झटका तो लगा, पर मैंने हार नहीं मानी। अपनी पूरी मेहनत लगा दी पढ़ाई में और नतीजा, साल के अंत में मैं अपने सेक्शन में फर्स्ट आया और खुद को साबित कर दिया। लेकिन सफलता का वो स्वाद ज्यादा देर तक टिक नहीं पाया। 8वीं क्लास आते आते ऐसा लगा जैसे सब कुछ बिखरने लगा है। किसी रिश्तेदार ने ये बात कह दी और मेरी सारी खुशी पर पानी फिर गया। पिताजी भी बहुत निराश हुए और उन्होंने वो नई साइकिल भी वापस ले ली जो कुछ दिन पहले ही मुझे इनाम में मिली थी। मेरी पढ़ाई तो जैसे पूरी तरह से पटरी से ही उतर गई। जो विषय कभी अच्छे लगते थे, अब वही डरावने लगने लगे थे। शाम को घर से लाए भूजा खाकर गुजारा तो हो जाता था, पर पढ़ाई का हाल बहुत बहुत बुरा हो चुका था। हालत ये हो गई कि मैं इतना हताश था, इतना खोया हुआ था कि पास होने के लिए मैंने और मेरे एक दोस्त ने मिलकर एक कुंजी यानी कि एक चीट शीट खरीद ली। पर किस्मत देखिए, वो योजना भी फेल हो गई। किसी ने वो कुंजी चुरा ली और मैं परीक्षा के लिए बिल्कुल खाली हाथ रह गया। सच में वो मेरी जिंदगी का सबसे बुरा दौर था। ये मेरी जिंदगी का सबसे खराब दौर था, लेकिन शायद यहीं से एक बहुत बड़े बदलाव की चिंगारी जलने वाली थी। 8वीं के खराब नतीजों के बाद माँ ने मुझे एक टीचर के पास रहने भेज दिया। वहां एक सहपाठी ने मुझ पर तंज कसा, कहा कि मैं तो बस एक औसत छात्र हूं। वो बात मेरे दिल में चुभ गई। बस वही निराशा मेरा ईंधन बन गई। हताश होने की जगह मुझे गुस्सा आया और मैंने अपना सारा गुस्सा, अपनी सारी एनर्जी किताबों में झोंक दी। उस नए दृढ़ संकल्प के साथ 9वीं कक्षा में मेरी पढ़ाई लिखाई की दुनिया पूरी तरह से बदलने लगी और नतीजा बहुत जल्द सामने था। छमाही परीक्षा में मैंने एक शानदार वापसी की और 900 में से 650 से भी ज्यादा नंबर हासिल किए। मेरे टीचर श्री मुचकुंद कुंवर, उन्होंने मेरी मेहनत पर ध्यान दिया। वो प्रिंसिपल साहब के पास गए और आखिरकार मुझे क्लास के सबसे अच्छे सेक्शन बी में शिफ्ट कर दिया गया, जहां मुझे असल में पहले दिन से होना चाहिए था। इतना ही नहीं, मैं गणित में दूसरे छात्रों की मदद करने लगा और जब 10वीं की फाइनल परीक्षा हुई, तब तक मैं पूरे स्कूल में चौथा स्थान हासिल कर चुका था। मेरा खोया हुआ आत्मविश्वास अब वापस आ चुका था और परीक्षाएं भी खत्म हो गई थीं। अब मेरी दुनिया किताबों से आगे नए तरीकों से खुल रही थी। आज जब मैं पीछे मुड़कर देखता हूं, तो मुझे लगता है कि मेरे टीचर श्री मुचकुंद बाबू के साथ रहना ही मेरी उस वापसी का सबसे बड़ा कारण था। वही मेरी जिंदगी का टर्निंग पॉइंट था। पढ़ाई का बोझ उतरते ही जिंदगी के दूसरे रंग भी नजर आने लगे। मुझमें सिनेमा के लिए एक नया जुनून जागा और मैंने एक दूजे के लिए और सिलसिला जैसी फिल्में देखी। मेरी कहानी यही दिखाती है कि कैसे कभी-कभी निराशा का एक पल भी एक नई शुरुआत की चिंगारी बन सकता है और किसी को भी हार के अंधेरे से निकालकर जीत की राह पर ला सकता है।
All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at a pretty wild personal story, one of chaos and big changes, taking us from an engineering college in 1980s India straight to the wedding altar. It's a perfect example of how life, well, it just never goes according to plan, does it?
And we're kicking things off with this bombshell of a quote, a really bad blow to my career. I mean, wow, you just don't hear someone describe their wedding that way, right? So what on earth happened here? How does a day that's supposed to be a celebration end up feeling like such a huge setback? We're going to get into it.
Okay, so where does a story like this even begin? Well, every journey has that one moment, that one decision that kicks everything off. And for our narrator, it all started with choosing his college major. But here's the thing, this wasn't some carefully thought-out plan. Oh no, it was more like a flash of impulse, and honestly, a bit of desperation.
So check this out. It really shows you just how fast your entire life can pivot. He was all set to do mechanical engineering, But then, get this, he overhears some random engineer complaining that after 25 long years of work, all he's got to show for it is a scooter. And something just snaps. In that split second when his name is called, he just blurts out civil engineering to grab a spot at the prestigious MIT Muzaffarpur. Just like that, his whole future changed because of one guy's grumbling.
And this quote, man, it just gets right to the heart of his motivation, doesn't it? This wasn't just about getting a degree. It was about escaping. He literally calls his hometown of Patna the city of hell. College was his one-way ticket out of there. He could just feel that raw, desperate need for a fresh start in his words.
So, he makes it to college. And what does he find? Well, it's this whole new world, right? On one hand, there's this incredible freedom. But on the other, there's this super rigid control and a kind of wild, unpredictable vibe. It was a place of total contrasts.
I mean, on the one hand, being an engineering student had some amazing perks. We're not just talking about good libraries and sports fields. There was this level of prestige that's kind of hard to imagine now. Think about this. He could just walk into a movie theater, grab a seat, and the ticket guy would come to him to collect the money. That MIT student card, it was basically a passport to respect everywhere he went.
But then there was the flip side. The reality was pretty harsh. The syllabus was huge, and you had to study like you were still in school. The teachers had absolute power over your grades, so you did not want to get on their bad side. And the whole social scene was, a powder keg. Fights between student groups were happening all the time, and they could get so out of hand, the entire college would get shut down indefinitely.
And here's a crazy example of just how volatile things were. During a movie screening, a fight kicks off. And we're not talking about a little shoving match. No, this thing escalates to students literally throwing chairs from the balcony down onto the crowd below. It got so bad the police had to be called in. That's the kind of chaotic world he was trying to navigate.
So, as if the stress inside the college wasn't enough, the outside world started crashing in the most terrifying ways. That little bubble of student life, it was about to get popped by forces of nature and some really tough personal tragedies.
Just look at this timeline. During his college years and right after, he's just getting hit with one crisis after another. His grandfather passes away. A massive fire destroys his entire village. Then a major earthquake hits, and then he loses his grandmother. This isn't just background noise. These are life-shattering events, one right after the other.
Just let that sink in for a second. He comes home from college to find that his whole village has been basically incinerated. His own family's home is the only thing left standing, and even that's damaged. Can you just imagine the shock? Seeing your entire community, everything you knew, literally turned to ash?
So, in the middle of all this, the academic pressure, the campus fights, the natural disasters, another huge life event gets put into motion, his arranged marriage. And yeah, you guessed it, it was anything but simple.
Okay, so to really get what happens next, we have to understand this one key term, management. In this context, it's not about business. It's all about the really complex financial and material negotiations between the families, including things like the dowry, which were a super critical part of the whole arrangement.
So the road to marriage was a total roller coaster. He agrees to a match with a woman named Kanak, mainly because he was so impressed with their father's humility. But then an uncle steps in and objects because of some old family feud. Then the whole thing nearly falls apart over disagreements about management. And then, and this is a wild twist, that terrifying 1989 earthquake actually scares the families into putting their differences aside and just getting it done. So the wedding day finally gets here. This should have been the big celebration, right? The happy ending to a long, tough process? Instead, it was a complete nightmare.
This chart just says it all. Instead of being a happy, healthy groom, he was sick with typhoid fever. His cheek was all swollen from some dental work he'd had done. Emotionally, he was a wreck, physically trembling and just wanting it all to be over so he could go home. And his bride, Kanak, the poor woman was so scared and overwhelmed by it all that she got sick too. It was just a day of shared misery for both of them.
The only bit of good news, if you can call it that, was that a post-wedding custom had to be postponed because they were both so sick. And his reaction tells you everything. He was happy about it. He was so drained physically and emotionally that the absolute last thing he wanted was another ceremony. Which brings us right back to where we started, that quote about his marriage being a bad blow to his career. When you look back at the fever, the fear, and all the chaos surrounding it, you can totally see why he felt that way. But the real question is, was it really the end of something? Or was it just the painful, messy, and totally unpredictable start of a whole new chapter? It just goes to show you, life's most important moments rarely look like they do in the movies.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are getting into a really powerful story about struggle, about ambition, and about the totally unexpected ways life can turn out. We're heading back to 1990s Delhi, following a journey that's all about perseverance and what success can actually look like.
So, let's start with this quote because it just says it all, doesn't it? This is the world we're about to enter. We're talking about those high-stakes competitive exams in India, where the line between an amazing future and just complete disappointment is razor thin. One little mistake and everything changes.
All right, so picture this. It's 1990. A young, really determined engineering graduate shows up in Mukherjee Nagar, Delhi. And if you know, you know, this is the hub for people trying to become civil servants. And his goal? It's huge. He wants to beat the country's toughest exams all by himself. Just pure self-study. No coaching, just grit.
Okay, so this timeline really lays out the roller coaster we're about to go on. He gets to Delhi in 90, full of ambition. But then look, by 91 he's married and has a baby. You can just feel the pressure building, right? And it all leads to this massive crisis point in 1993.
You know, almost as soon as he got to Delhi, this new challenge popped up. And it wasn't about him not being smart enough or driven enough. Nope, it was something way more human. It was this incredibly powerful, almost magnetic pull toward his new wife who was waiting for him back home.
And here's that internal battle just laid bare. On one side, you've got the goal, this intense, rigorous self-study to build a future for his family. But on the other side, you have the constant visits home. He even says it was, and I quote, sucking my big energy. But at the time, he didn't even realize how much it was derailing his focus.
I mean, you got to appreciate the honesty here. He's not making excuses, he's just telling it like it was. The feeling he got from heading home was just a bigger reward than hitting the books. It's a dilemma that I think a lot of us can understand, right?
But here's the thing. Even with all these distractions, he got so close to his goal. And honestly, this is where the story gets really painful. Because these weren't huge failures. They were near misses, which, as you know, can hurt even more.
Just look at these numbers. Seriously. In 1990, he missed qualifying by just 4 marks. 4! The very next year, it was only 5 or 6 marks. He was right there, literally on the edge of success, again and again.
So by 1993, you can imagine all those near misses, the pressure from his family, that constant internal fight. It was all pushing him right to the edge. And this is the moment where things go from being just difficult to truly desperate.
This number, this tiny number, this is what he called the death knell for his confidence. A single, tiny error in a calculation. He was supposed to use 36.36 degrees, but he used 36.03. And in an exam where the difference between passing and failing is like 5 to 10 marks total, that one little slip cost him a whopping 20 marks. It was fatal.
And if that wasn't bad enough, at the exact same time, his money just ran out. He looked at his bank account and he had 1,200 rupees left. His monthly expenses? About 1,000. So yeah, he was basically broke. It felt like the dream was just collapsing around him.
As you can imagine, the fallout was pretty bad. He talks about being in this state of mental turmoil, gripped by fear. He was even going to the doctor for heart palpitations. And of course, all that anxiety just wrecked his performance in the interviews. So finally, feeling guilty and completely out of money, he decided that was it. He was going to leave Delhi.
So really, was this it? With no money left and his confidence totally shattered, it looked like it was all over. He was ready to pack up and go home, defeated.
But then, right when he hit rock bottom, something absolutely wild happened. The results came out for a junior-level exam, one he didn't even want to take. He only did it as a favor for a friend. He had zero interest in the job. And what do you know? He ranked 17th in the entire country.
And that one result, it changed everything. I love how he put it. It was like a drop of water in the heat of the desert. It was this single moment of relief that saved him. It wasn't the dream job, not even close. But man, it was a lifeline when he was absolutely drowning.
So this completely unexpected twist, this total detour from what he had planned, how did it all turn out in the end?
Well, here's the beautiful irony of it all. That junior job that he never wanted, that was the very thing that allowed him to stay in Delhi. It was a path he was basically forced onto, but it's what saved his dream by keeping him in the one city that had the most opportunity for him to grow.
When you look back, his whole story is just this incredible, real-life definition of perseverance. It's about what happens when you keep going, even when you're exhausted and feel like you're failing, because you just never, ever know when that drop of water in the desert is going to show up.
His story just makes you think, doesn't it? The one path he tried so hard to avoid ended up being his salvation. So it leaves us with this question. How often are the best things in our lives, our greatest opportunities, hiding in plain sight as the detours we never wanted to take?
To many, passing the UPSC exam and becoming a Class 1 officer in the Border Roads Organization represents the finish line. It carries the weight of institutional authority and the promise of a stable, middle-class life, a dream of respect and a settled home for one's family. That dream met a physical reality on a train platform in Jaipur. While leaving for a new posting, the narrator looked back to see the teary eyes of his young son. It was the first indication that the job's requirements were separate from the life he intended to build. The hope for a fixed location vanished almost immediately. The role demanded constant movement across some of the most isolated and dangerous terrain in the country. Under these arches, the scale of the commitment becomes clear. The BRO is tasked with carving highways into mountains and bridging rivers in environments where nature is actively hostile to human presence. These roads are built on a specific logistical trade-off. To connect the nation's borders, the engineers are required to sever their own family connections, trading domestic stability for geographic necessity. One of the first postings was 80 kilometers from the nearest town, deep in the tri-border jungle where Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh meet. Work here meant navigating unpaved roads in 50-degree heat. Every movement was dictated by the threat of landmines, requiring constant vigilance and a total lack of civilian security. Living quarters were a dilapidated forest bungalow nicknamed the Ghost House. Life there consisted of bathing in muddy river water and discovering wood frogs nesting inside the joints of the furniture and toilets. The logistical duties were just as volatile. Moving through the jungle to pay laborers meant carrying large sums of cash through areas prone to Naxalite attacks, relying entirely on an armed police escort for protection. After weeks in these outposts, a pattern emerged. The physical danger and the total isolation made it impossible to imagine a scenario where a family could survive, let alone thrive. A transfer to Arunachal Pradesh swapped the jungle heat for the high-altitude unpredictability of the China border. This image shows the aftermath of a typical landslide, where roads are regularly reclaimed by the mountains. New localized threats appeared. Wild elephants frequently attacked vehicles at night, and in the unheated barracks, snakes often sought warmth under the engineers' pillows. Reaching the Sela Pass means operating at 13,700 feet. At this altitude, communication is a luxury. Lifelines were reduced to rare, brief phone calls from public booths, just to catch a few seconds of a family member's voice. The high mountains provide a natural defense against insurgency, but they create a different kind of pressure. The absolute silence and physical isolation begin to wear on the mind in ways the jungle never did. The organization requires officers to spend 15 years in these rotating, isolated postings before they are eligible for a stable, family-friendly location. Long-term isolation often results in a permanent sense of displacement. One officer returned to his village in Punjab for leave, only to come back early. He realized his family had learned to function entirely without him. To manage the silence of the outposts, many turned to heavy, ritualized drinking. In the absence of civilian life, alcohol becomes the primary way to pass the time between work shifts. This environment fuels erratic behavior. One completely intoxicated driver nearly drove off a mountain cliff. Another was abandoned in the forest as punishment for his drinking. By the time an officer approaches the end of those 15 years, they often find themselves alienated from the families they were working to support. For the narrator, the isolation culminated in a severe depressive episode. The constant loneliness manifested as physical weakness and heart palpitations that made it impossible to continue his field duties. He decided to prioritize his mental survival over his career status. He submitted a technical resignation, prepared to walk away from his rank as a Class 1 officer. The ministry denied the request. The official response stated the government had invested too much in his training to allow him to leave the service. He spent months fighting the bureaucracy.
Eventually, he chose to accept a demotion to a junior engineer position in a different department, sacrificing his elite rank just to return to his family. Every mile of remote road on the border represents a massive logistical and engineering achievement for the nation. But these roads also represent a series of quiet, personal collapses, the domestic lives and mental well-being of the
Welcome
engineers.
to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a deeply personal story that asks a pretty fundamental question. Why on earth would someone choose a harder path on purpose? We're going to uncover a story of chaos, community, and how sometimes the toughest times can lead to the most unexpected growth. All right, let's dive right in. The whole thing kicks off with a choice that goes against, well, pretty much all conventional wisdom, not to mention his own father's wishes. He takes a deliberate step down the career ladder, and that one decision sets off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. And that's really the big question we're exploring here, isn't it? We're going to follow this one man's journey through a series of crises, some he chose, and some that definitely chose him, to figure out what we can find when we step off that easy, comfortable road. So let's set the scene. It's 2001. Life is good, it's stable, pleasant even. But a promotion is on the horizon, and it's about to turn everything completely upside down. Just look at the two options on the table here. It's a huge contrast, right? On one side, you've got a comfortable life in Delhi, a familiar job, stability, regular parties. And on the other side, a promotion, sure, but it's in Manipur, a place defined by the unknown, by political chaos and constant threats. It's that classic dilemma: stick with comfort or chase the career advancement. But this is the moment everything pivots. Instead of trying to game the system or push for a safer spot, he does the exact opposite. He just lets go. He leaves his future up to what he calls the natural flow of time. That one sentence, that simple act of surrender, is what launches him into the total unknown. And fate answers the call. He gets sent to Imphal, Manipur. And that initial excitement, his first time ever on a plane, it's about to slam right into a very, very different reality. I mean, look at this timeline. There is no easing into it. His first 48 hours are an absolute blur. He literally lands and is immediately sent to a crisis zone to check out a collapsed building. He's thrown right into the deep end, both professionally and personally. And it didn't take him long to realize that the job itself was just one layer of the problem. The whole region was steeped in a really complex local conflict. You had several different insurgent groups, major ethnic divisions. This wasn't just a new city, it was an active conflict zone. So, you have to wonder, right? How do you even begin to function, let alone build a life, in an environment that's so tense? Well, the answer, as it turns out, is surprisingly practical. Okay, this next part is just fascinating. He takes what should be a pretty standard management task and turns it into this brilliant peacemaking strategy. He figured out that the threats were coming from frustrated local contractors who weren't getting work. So he just methodically and fairly divvied up the maintenance projects among all of them. And that simple, logical act, it calmed everything down. The threats started to fade. But it wasn't just about work strategies. They knew they had to build real human connections. And this is the amount of money he and his colleagues pooled together, a huge sum at the time, and they used it to organize a Durga Puja festival, a deliberate effort to create a moment of shared joy in all the chaos. And you can just feel the power of that effort in this quote. It wasn't just a party, right? It was a bridge. By sharing local food, they were creating a space where the staff and the locals could connect on a simple human level. But yeah, let's be real here. These moments of connection didn't just magically erase all the challenges. Basic things like getting clean water were a daily struggle. They had to boil water from a pond. They'd get calls from insurgent groups telling them to stop playing Hindi music. And they were always reminded that they were outsiders, being called Mayang, which means foreigners. So life eventually found this tough but kind of manageable rhythm. But just when it felt like things were starting to smooth out, the story takes another huge dramatic turn. A new crisis was brewing. And this one was way more personal and honestly, a lot more terrifying than anything he'd faced before. There's this line from his own writing that just sends a chill down your spine. It's this moment of incredible self-awareness, almost like a premonition, a sense that whenever things get calm, a new storm is about to hit. And he was right. And then it happens. It starts with this pain in his eye that just won't go away. in a place with very few medical resources. He's just using whatever medicine he can get his hands on. But without a real diagnosis, his condition gets worse fast. 2 feet. Just think about that for a second. That became his maximum field of vision. He described his left eye as seeing nothing but a curtain-like white ice. All the external dangers of his postings suddenly became this very physical, very personal, and absolutely terrifying internal crisis. So finally, he gets an answer. And it's just a brutal diagnosis, a severe inflammatory condition. And the real kicker? He got this diagnosis in a place that had absolutely zero way of treating it. He had to get help, and he had to go hundreds and hundreds of miles to find it. So this crisis kicks off another journey. I mean, yes, a literal physical journey to Chennai for treatment, but also something deeper. A journey back from the brink that would completely reframe his whole experience and how he saw everything that had happened. And this was the final leg of the journey, the long road back. It was this whole ordeal of grueling train travel, medical treatments, and a ton of uncertainty before. Finally, his transfer back to Delhi was approved. The circle that started 2 years earlier was now complete. And this is where it all clicks into place for him. He has this incredible realization. That impossibly hard posting, the one that gave him so much grief, was, in a strange way, the very thing that pulled him out of the depression he was in before he left. This unfavorable situation became his unexpected path back to himself. So what he came back with was so much more than a prescription. It was this whole new understanding. That resilience, it's forged in the fire. That human connection is an absolute lifeline when everything's fallen apart. And that sometimes the path that looks the hardest is the one that leads you exactly where you need to go. You know, this whole story is just a powerful reminder that our biggest challenges can hold the keys to our biggest breakthroughs. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What's that one unfavorable situation in your own life that, looking back now, actually taught you something profound about yourself? Today, we're diving into a family's incredible decade-long journey, one that takes them through some serious crisis and ultimately triumph. It's a really powerful story about resilience, told from a father's point of view, and it highlights the immense sacrifices they made to build a better future for their kids. You know, this one sentence from the father really gets to the heart of the whole story. It just speaks volumes about their strength, that ability to find happiness and a sense of purpose, even when everything seems to be stacked against you. It's a theme that you're going to see again and again through every single challenge this family faces. So let's set the scene. Our story kicks off in 2004. The family has just moved to Delhi, and even with all the challenges, there's this real feeling of hope in the air. They're starting to lay down the roots for a completely new life, one piece at a time.
And look, every decision they made here was completely strategic. The father was dealing with uveitis. It's this chronic, really painful eye inflammation. So he got a job at a hospital just so he could be close to his doctors. The kids, Nishant and Shreya, got into a good school. And yeah, they were living in a tiny rented room, but that dream of owning their own home, it was always there, burning bright.
And you know what? They actually did it. They made that dream a reality. The mother, Kanak, was really the one pushing for it. They pulled together all their resources, they took out a loan, they even sold some gold just to buy their own little flat. I mean, that was a moment of just pure joy for them, a massive achievement. They had finally made it. But just as they were finally settling into this new life, their entire world was completely shattered. In 2005, something happened that would test them in ways they could have never, ever imagined. They were coming home from a wedding late one night, and the unthinkable happened. The father just remembers this sudden, violent crash from behind, a single moment that changed absolutely everything. This is where the real devastation happened. The motorcycle hit the father, yeah, but it ran directly over his wife, Kanak. In his own words, her hip and thigh bones were broken to parts. The dream they had just spent everything to build had instantly turned into a complete nightmare. And right on the heels of that physical trauma came the financial shock. The first hospital they got to demanded 50,000 rupees, right there on the spot. But they had just poured every single penny they had into their new home. The father had nothing. Can you imagine that feeling of just absolute helplessness? So that accident wasn't just a single event. It was the beginning of this long, agonizing ordeal that would push the entire family right to its breaking point. This was the ultimate test of their will to just survive and recover. This timeline just shows the sheer grit it took to get through this. The father was so shocked watching his wife's emergency procedure that he actually fainted. After the operation, Kanak was completely bedridden, and yet from that bed, she showed this unbelievable strength, even directing the whole household. It took 6 long, painful months before she could even stand up with a walker. Through all of that pain, all that struggle, they endured. And the father's reflection on it isn't bitter at all. It's just pure perseverance. It's a simple, powerful statement. They had survived the storm. So, with that immediate physical crisis slowly passing, the family's focus started to shift. And it was Kanak, the one who was still recovering, who directed all their energy toward the next huge challenge, making sure their kids had a secure future through education. Kanak was insistent that their son, who they called Nishu, join a top engineering coaching class. But the father was hesitant. I mean, Nishu hadn't had all the prior training that most of the other kids get, and the entrance test for the coaching class itself was ridiculously competitive. Were they pushing him too hard, too fast? But Nishu totally rose to the challenge. His dad told him to just aim for like 30% on the test. Nishu ended up attempting over half the questions, and he got in. And at the same time, his younger sister Shreya was becoming incredibly self-reliant. With her parents so focused on recovery and her brother's studies, she just excelled at everything: academics, youth parliament, hockey, without ever burdening them. Both kids were really finding their own ways to be resilient. Okay, so all of that determination, over years of recovery and intense studying, was about to be put to the ultimate test. It was time for Nishu to face this series of national entrance exams that would basically decide his entire future. The pressure was unbelievable. You can just feel the tension building with each result. First, a good rank in the VIT exam. Whew. Okay, that was a huge relief, a solid backup plan. They were literally about to get on a train to Chennai for the admission when the next result came in, the JEE main score. It was so strong that they canceled the tickets, feeling confident he'd get into a good government school. And then came the final hurdle: JEE Advanced. And he did it. He got into IIT Roorkee, one of the most prestigious engineering colleges in the entire country. This was the moment, the culmination of every sacrifice, the pain from the accident, the financial struggles, all of it had led to this one incredible victory. And look, this win wasn't just about pride. It was about survival. Getting into a top government-funded school like an IIT meant they avoided the absolutely crushing weight of private college fees. So this academic success, it was also their financial redemption. But this next chapter brought a totally unexpected kind of tension. Nishu, after being shaped by his experiences at IIT, was now dreaming of being an entrepreneur. For a father who had fought so hard for security, his son wanting to choose such a risky, unpredictable path, well, it was a source of some deep worry. And Nishu's ambition, it just didn't slow down at all. While he was holding down a corporate job, he was studying for his MBA exams, and he ended up scoring in the 99th percentile. He earned a spot at IIM Kolkata, another one of India's elite schools, with his drive now pointed squarely at building something of his own. And this brings us to the final, really fascinating question this story leaves us with. For the father, victory meant achieving the safety and stability he never had. But for the son, victory meant earning the freedom to take the very risks his father had spent a lifetime trying to avoid. It's a powerful thing to think about, what it truly means to build a better life.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to step right into the shoes of a civil engineer to hear his personal story of balancing 2 absolutely monumental projects over 7 long years. On the one hand, he's building a landmark for an entire nation, and on the other, he's building the very foundation for his own family's future.
I mean, this quote just says it all, right? It gets right to the heart of the matter. It perfectly frames this whole story around these 2 parallel tracks. The immense pressure of a high-stakes professional life running right alongside the equally intense and, maybe even more important, demands of being a father.
And right off the bat, he makes a distinction that is so crucial. He says, look, this is not the architect's story. I'm not the one dreaming up how it looks. I'm the civil engineer, the one who has to deal with the physics, the foundation, and its actual survival against the forces of nature. My job is to make sure the thing actually stands. And as you're about to see, that was no small feat.
So this timeline gives you that bird's-eye view of how these two massive undertakings just unfolded in lockstep. The Supreme Court project kicks off in 2012, and almost right away in 2013, his daughter Shreya starts her own intense journey into engineering. You fast forward to 2018, both of his kids have found their footing. And then finally, in 2020, the building project wraps up. We're talking about a decade of parallel pressures.
Okay, so let's dive into that first challenge, the massive Supreme Court project. And believe me, this was never just another construction job. It was a full-blown engineering nightmare from the very beginning.
So what was the problem? Well, it all came down to one simple thing: water. The building was right on the bank of the Yamuna River, where the water table was incredibly high. This created a constant, powerful upward force, it's called buoyancy, that was literally trying to push the entire structure right out of the ground. Think of it like a giant ship wanting to float.
So you've got this triple threat that he was up against. First, that constant upward push from the high water table. Second, water was seeping in constantly because, well, the usual waterproofing methods were completely failing. And then, to top it all off, the entire structure was dangerously unstable in an earthquake zone. Just a recipe for disaster. And get this, that instability led to a truly terrifying number. Their analysis showed that during even a minor earthquake, parts of the building could shift and settle by as much as 10 centimeters. Now, for a huge stone building like this, a shift that big is absolutely catastrophic. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. It was a ticking time bomb.
Okay, so now let's switch gears to that second project, the one happening at home. Because while our engineer was fighting a literal battle with physics down at the courthouse, he was also navigating the high-stakes, high-pressure world of guiding his two kids, Shreya and Nishant, into their own futures.
And wow, this quote is just so powerful. It describes his daughter, Shreya, on the morning of her huge engineering entrance exam. It just perfectly captures that feeling of being a parent, watching your kid go through something so intense and feeling that mix of pride and helplessness. He was right there for it all.
And this just perfectly shows the two different tracks he was managing at home. On one side, you have Shreya on this highly structured, absolutely grueling path of engineering, coaching, and exams. Then on the other side, you have his son Nishant facing a whole different set of challenges. A sudden health scare right before college, the tough search for a good internship, and finally carving out a more unconventional career path.
So here's the deal. You've got the building on the verge of failure, and his kids at these critical turning points in their lives. Your standard playbook, it's just not going to work. This is where the story really pivots to finding creative, unconventional solutions, both as a world-class engineer and as a dad.
Yeah, the stuff they teach you in engineering school, it just wasn't cutting it. The team had to think way outside the box, and they found their answer by looking at Singapore's airport, which had dealt with similar water pressure problems. The solution was this specialized American technology, a combination of something called a Grace sheet and Penetron powder. It was an absolute game changer for the project.
And you know what's amazing? He took that same creative, think-outside-the-box mindset and applied it to his son's career. To get Nishant an internship at a huge company like Britannia, he didn't call up some vice president. No, he started at the ground level. He started by just talking to the security guard, the chowkidar, who pointed him in the right direction. It's such a brilliant lesson in persistence and just being a good human.
And boy, did that hard work pay off. Check this out. While she's still in her third year of college, Shreya lands an internship at a company called Sumo Logic that's paying 50,000 rupees a month. Incredible, right? Well, that internship then converts directly into a full-time job offer with a starting salary of 1.8 million rupees a year. Just a phenomenal success.
All right, and that brings us to the finish line. After all those years of just intense, relentless effort on both fronts, these two long, difficult, and deeply personal projects finally came to a successful end. So, after they brought in that new tech and spent years just carefully watching and executing, they finally did it. The huge technical problems with the Supreme Court building were solved. The foundation was secure, the building was safe. It was going to stand. But here's the crazy part. Because the project took so long, people got transferred, they moved on, and by the very end, he was the last man standing. The last original officer on the job. He was the one who single-handedly saw it through the final stages, signed off on the completion documents, and finally felt that immense weight lift off his shoulders. And at the exact same time, that other project, his family, also hit this incredible milestone. Nishant had taken what he learned and founded his own company, an educational startup. And Shreya, leaving that high-paying corporate job, decided to join him. They weren't just finding jobs, they were becoming entrepreneurs, building a brand new legacy, together.
You know, this final thought from him, it just says everything, doesn't it? After a decade of battling buoyancy, both the geological kind and the emotional kind, a sense of peace and calm finally settled in. The two foundations he had worked so hard to build, one made of concrete and steel, and the other of love and guidance, they were both finally solid.
So as we wrap this up, this whole incredible story kind of leaves us with a question to ask ourselves, right? Because really, whether it's at work or at home, we're all engineers of our own legacies in some way. So it's worth asking, what foundations are you building today?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really powerful personal memoir. It's all about the incredible peaks and, well, the terrifying valleys of one family's journey. A story of amazing career highs, deep love, and a completely unforeseen battle for life itself.
So, this quote right here, it actually frames the entire story. It's a thought that lands with so much more weight once you understand the journey that led to it. It's a challenge to all of us, really. Okay, let's explore the journey that gave this quote its profound meaning.
Okay, so our story kicks off in late 2020. After 16 years in Delhi, the author gets a big promotion and a transfer, starting a whole new chapter of his life in the absolutely stunning Himalayan hills of Srinagar, Garhwal. And wow, was the ascent swift. I mean, just look at this timeline. Within a single year, he and his wife Kanak had not only settled into their new life, exploring these majestic surroundings, but he had also hit a brand new peak in his career.
And this number? 85 crores. This just says it all, doesn't it? With his team, he took the status of his division from 35 crores all the way up to a staggering 85 crores. I mean, what a tremendous achievement, a true summit of his career.
But, you know, life in the Himalayas, it wasn't just about work, not even close. It was this constant adventure, and it was defined by this incredible duality, where breathtaking beauty existed right alongside imminent, life-threatening danger.
And this right here was their everyday reality. A trip to Badrinath could be just picturesque and serene, and then another journey could turn into a desperate fight for survival against the elements.
Yeah, this quote from the author is just chilling, and it really puts you right there in the driver's seat, you know? It captures that constant tension, that razor's edge they lived on, where one tiny mistake on those mountain roads could have fatal consequences.
And if you want a perfect example of that peril, look no further than this harrowing journey from Kedarnath. I mean, just imagine it. A helicopter crashes, a sudden snowstorm hits, and they're stranded with no warm clothes, no shelter. They had to escape on horseback in total darkness. A truly terrifying ordeal that just shows you the unforgiving power of the mountains.
So we've seen these incredible professional highs and these, literal mountain peaks. But now the story shifts to a much more personal summit, a moment of pure family joy.
So right in the middle of all this adventure and these professional demands, life brings this amazing new chapter. Their son, Nishant, was ready for marriage, and the whole family just joyfully dove into planning the wedding.
And on this date, February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day, no less, everything was perfect. A new daughter, Vartika, joined their family. The author says this was the absolute peak of their happiness.
But you know how stories go. Just as they reached this perfect summit, this moment of pure contentment, a storm that absolutely nobody saw coming was about to break with devastating force.
The author's own words here, they just send a shiver down your spine. He knew something was coming. And the first sign was so subtle, something only a husband might notice. His wife, Kanak, was uncharacteristically silent on a train journey. Just a small detail, but it hinted at a huge shift.
And just look at how terrifyingly fast this all happened. It goes from a quiet, private fear to a panicked internet search to a frantic rush to Delhi for tests, and then the one word that changes everything: carcinoma.
So that diagnosis, it marked the end of their Himalayan adventures and the beginning of a completely different kind of journey, a grueling battle, a war for life itself.
And this moment is just so raw and so honest. It's his wife Kanak's profound question cried out in the hospital, why me? It's that unanswerable question at the very heart of their suffering, a moment of pure, understandable anguish.
And their fight really was a multi-stage war.
It started with a successful but major 4-hour surgery that was followed by the trauma of chemotherapy every 15 days, and then the continuous painful process of radiation. Each stage was its own battle.
This description from the author is just heartbreaking. Those long, silent drives from the hospital, filled with unspoken fear and shared pain. It was a journey they had to make together, often in complete silence, a total world away from their earlier mountain travel.
So, after enduring what the author literally calls the day of hell, they slowly began to emerge. They were changed forever, of course, but they were emerging into a new kind of normal.
In this trip, this was so much more than just a vacation. It was a deliberate act of reclaiming life. Enjoying road trips, trying new foods with their kids, it was a celebration of survival and a return to the simple joys they had fought so incredibly hard for.
So what did they take away from this whole terrible ordeal? Well, some really profound lessons. They learned the true value of a support system, the deep meaning of gratitude, and the incredible power of human resilience.
And that brings us all the way back to the beginning, back to that final thought from the author, which is all about this one powerful word, repent. And it's not about sin here, it's about regret. Regret for a life not lived to its absolute fullest.
So after walking through their journey, the soaring summits, and the terrifying storms, the author leaves us with this. It's not just a conclusion to his story. It's a universal question for all of us to think about in our own lives. Are we playing the game wisely?
Today, we're going to dive into a really personal story about, well, navigating the storms of life. It's a journey that spans from 2024 to 2026, and it shows how we can use ancient wisdom and our own passions to not just get through tough times, but to actually come out stronger on the other side. At its heart, this is a story about building an internal compass, something to help us navigate the crazy, unpredictable world out there. We're going to see exactly how a clear philosophy, the supportive family, and finding joy in new things can be our guide. And really, it all boils down to this one powerful idea. This isn't just some nice quote. It's the anchor for this entire story. It's the core belief that shapes every single reaction to the challenges we're about to explore. Okay, so let's get into it. The journey starts with a pretty jarring contrast, a moment of peace that's being completely overshadowed by some intense chaos at work. So you've got this massive clash, right? On one hand, you have a work culture so draining, so harsh, that it was the worst seen in a 33-year career. But the solution wasn't to fight that chaos head-on. Instead, it was to turn inward and build, you could say, an internal sanctuary, a place of peace and control. And the tool for building that sanctuary? Stoicism. It's a philosophy that's just perfectly designed for this kind of situation. It's all about focusing your energy only on what you can control, like your own thoughts and reactions, while also building up the strength to deal with everything you can't. This became the essential guide through the storm. And now, this is where that philosophy was really put to the test. Because just as that professional storm was raging, a much more personal, much bigger hurricane was about to hit right at home. This timeline, wow, it really lays out the whole emotional roller coaster of these 3 years. You can see this powerful arc, right? It moves from this deep crisis to pure celebration, and then finally into a brand new, very intentional way of living. And this period, this was incredibly serious. It wasn't just a small scare. We're talking about a sudden 3-month deep dive into a world of hospitals, oncologists, and surgeons. This was the ultimate test of that inner strength, shifting focus away from what couldn't be controlled, the diagnosis, and onto what could, being a rock for the family. And this is such a brilliant way to describe that feeling of finally coming out the other side. That metaphor of a plane stuck in a storm, finally breaking through the clouds into clear skies, it just perfectly captures that huge sense of relief and the slow return to normal life. So after getting through not one but 2 massive storms, one at work and one that was deeply personal, a bit of sunshine finally broke through. A truly joyous occasion appeared on the horizon, marking the start of a beautiful new chapter. And that new chapter was kicked off by the wonderful news of his daughter Shreya's marriage. What made it even sweeter was that her fiancé, Swapnil, was someone the family already knew and really liked, so it just brought this incredible wave of happiness to everyone. Getting to the wedding itself was this whole wonderful journey. It started with the families meeting, then looking for venues, and then they found this amazing spot. They decided on a destination wedding on the beautiful shores of a lake. It was just this deliberately crafted, perfect celebration. And then the big day arrived, November 18th, 2025. It was more than just a date. It was a milestone of pure joy, a real turning point that symbolized the calm after the storm. So you get through the turmoil, you have this amazing celebration. What's next? Does the story just end there? No way. Instead, a new, intentional, and really fulfilling chapter begins. This new phase is all about creating a powerful daily rhythm. I mean, look at this mix. You've got physical discipline with daily exercise, creative expression through learning the violin, and then a really cool modern challenge, building apps with AI. And all of this is happening while also finding new purpose at work and getting ready for a well-deserved retirement. But you know, what's so grounding about this new chapter, what's so powerful, is that even with all this personal growth into music and tech, the heart is still firmly tied to family roots, especially to a 95-year-old mother. It's all about growth that's still anchored by tradition. So when you look back at this whole journey, from using philosophy to handle chaos to finding new passions, it all really leaves us with this one final, powerful question. Life is always throwing lessons at us, right? In the good times and the bad. The real question is for us. Are we actually prepared to learn them?